in the name of personal injury law.
Warm weather is here, and so is motorcycle season. Today we have Steve Sinas of the Sinas Dramus Law Firm to talk about the most frequently asked questions pertaining to motorcycle accidents. Welcome, Steve.
Thanks for having me. Throughout our history, we've represented people injured in motorcycle accidents, so we hope that we can provide some answers to some of these questions here today.
Can a person injured in a motorcycle accident receive Michigan no-fault benefits?
So let me first start by explaining that Michigan no-fault benefits can be very important to a person who's seriously injured in a motorcycle accident. Unfortunately, oftentimes people who are injured in a motorcycle accident are severely hurt and they need a lot of medical care and rehab. And Michigan no-fault insurance benefits are there to cover people's long-term care needs. There are varying amounts of coverage that's available under the law, but when you think about no-fault, you should think about medical care, and it can also cover income loss, and they're payable regardless of fault. But here's the thing, if you're just injured in a motorcycle crash that doesn't involve a motor vehicle, and the way the law defines a motor vehicle defines it as something that's not a motorcycle essentially, a car, a truck, or anything like that is a motor vehicle. If a motorcyclist is injured in such a way that doesn't involve the active use of a motor vehicle, they cannot recover no-fault benefits. And that means they'll have to find some other source of coverage for their medical expenses. So when we handle these cases, the first place we start is, can the person pass the test for no-fault benefits? And sometimes it's obvious, or many times it's obvious, where you have somebody who's hit by a car. But I actually litigated a case involving high beam headlights, where a motorcyclist was blinded by the headlights. And the question was whether the headlights were actively involved with the motorcyclist crashing his motorcycle. And we litigated the case for 4 years over that issue. Luckily, we were able to make a result for the client and get him the care that he needed. But there are times where that question can be litigated and extensively.
So if there's a dispute with, who caused the accident or who should pay, which insurance company pays for that motorcyclist injuries when they have a lot of care that they need?
So it can be multiple insurance companies you have to look at. First of all, when you're talking about no-fault benefits, there's this rule that says that if the motor vehicle is involved in the crash, you actually turn to the policy that insured that motor vehicle. So if I was on a motorcycle and you were in your car and we came to an intersection and you hit me, I would claim my no-fault benefits from your policy, not my own.
Which is the opposite of what it normally is.
Right, you normally, a no-fault, you normally turn to your own policy, but there's a special rule for motorcyclists. So it can get complicated. If you don't have insurance, it can come back to my insurance. If I don't have insurance, you can even go to this thing called the assigned claims plan. So when you're talking about no-fault insurance benefits and motorcyclists, you really have to think it through.
And what if the motorcycle has no other vehicles involved?
If no motor vehicles involved, then the motorcyclist probably caused the crash on their own, or if it's another motorcyclist, they could maybe bring a different type of personal injury tort claim against the motorcyclist.
Or a pothole, maybe they could sue the county road commission.
Right, okay. You can assess fault for other parties, but usually it's a motor vehicle is the only other party that really leads to a viable lawsuit. So, road defect cases are difficult.
So even if the motorcyclist has like a vehicle for which they have a no-fault insurance policy, it does not turn to their no-fault insurance policy because they happen to be on a motorcycle that did not involve another vehicle.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
Okay. Yeah. So can the motorcyclist sue the at-fault driver?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And so if you have a collision between a motorcyclist and a motor vehicle, you're going to pursue the no-fault coverage, and you're going to pursue it through the at-fault driver's insurance policy. And when you recover those benefits, you aren't also addressing your pain and suffering needs, your pain and suffering, loss of quality of life damages that you may have due to the crash. Also, no-fault insurance benefits only cover up to 3 years of income loss. So if you are injured beyond 3 years and you can't go to work, you can make that excess damage claim for your income loss against the at-fault driver. So there are some important damages that consist of the pain and suffering claim and excess income loss that you can pursue against the at-fault driver.
Okay, so who pays for the physical damage and repair of a motorcycle under Michigan law?
So unfortunately, motorcyclists can be caught between a rock and a hard place here, where if they're hit by an at-fault driver, if they don't have their own insurance covering their motorcycle, there really isn't a way to recover their vehicle damage. There are certain ways you can sue at-fault drivers for vehicle damage if you're using a motor vehicle, but for motorcyclists, they need to insure their own motorcycle or they're likely not going to have a source of recovery for their motorcycle damage.
So the message I'm getting from all of this is if you own a car and you're driving a car, everybody needs to have no-fault insurance because you have to protect yourself from the possibility that you're going to have an accident with a motorcycle, even if you're not at fault.
That's very true, actually, and there can be penalties if you don't have no-fault insurance. So
Right.
you have to have that, but one of the ways you insure yourself against having too much liability for injuring a motorcyclist is if there is that no-fault coverage in place to cover their medical care, they'll get it through no-fault insurance and not have to sue you for that medical care.
Okay, switching gears, are motorcyclists required to wear a helmet in Michigan?
They are not required to wear a helmet, but you have to be over the age of 21. You have to have a motorcycle endorsement for more than 2 years, and you have to carry this special form of insurance known as motorcycle no fault, which is different than auto no fault, not to make things more confusing, but that's the reality. And you have to buy $20,000 of motorcycle no fault coverage to be to make it legal for you to operate a motorcycle without a helmet.
So help break this down for us. For Michigan motorcyclists, what types of insurance coverage is either required, optional, or recommended?
You have to buy liability insurance and property damage insurance. That is to cover an event where your motorcycle somehow damages property. Say you run into a building or something like that, there's an insurance claim then against your auto insurance and your property damage. Liability is if you are using your motorcycle and you hurt someone else and they sue you. You have to have those coverages. If you don't, you can face penalties. You can also buy motorcycle no-fault insurance, which is that special form of no-fault insurance that actually does insure you if you're a motorcyclist, even if there's not a motor vehicle involved. So there's that special form of insurance you can buy. But then you also should be looking at whether or not you have underinsured motorist coverage through your own auto policy that will kick in the event you're operating your motorcycle and hit by a driver who's at fault but doesn't have enough insurance to cover your damages. So if I was on my motorcycle and you hit me and say you only had $50,000 of liability insurance and my damages were $200,000, if I had underinsured motorist coverage, I could turn to my auto insurance, assuming there's not a motorcycle exclusion, and make that claim. So if you're a motorcyclist, you really need to look into what your underinsured coverage is and also uninsured coverage with your own auto insurance and make sure that there's not a motorcycle exclusion that is in effect under your policy.
Okay, so at what point after a motorcycle accident would it make sense to contact an attorney such as yourself?
Well, the more severe your injuries, the more serious your legal rights are going to be, in terms of what you need going forward. And so if you're seriously hurt, you really need to think about all your legal rights. You need to make sure that they're properly pursued. You have various insurance coverages to be looking into. So if you know what you're doing, you can maybe try to go it alone. But I would recommend any friend or family member to consult an attorney because it's just complicated for motorcyclists more than any other person under the Michigan no-fault law. I think motorcyclists have it most complicated.
Right. Thank you for explaining that to us, Steve.
Yes, thank you for having me on today.
In the Name of Personal Injury Law is brought to you by the Sinas Law Firm.